Welcome to the Peering Podcast, where the best way to see the future is to peer into it together. It's smart talk with a twinkle in its eye, about peer power, leadership agility, and collective intelligence in a world spinning faster every day. Hosted by Mike Richardson and friends, we peer into what it really takes to stay human, stay curious, and stay future-ready. Real conversation, where peers get curious, curiosity gets peery, and leadership gets real. So pull up a chair, and let's peer into it together.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Peering Podcast, where the best way to see the future is to peer into it together. I'm really excited today that we're going to be peering into the challenges faced by CEOs of life sciences businesses and companies and enterprises. And to help us do that, we have somebody who has been in that lane his whole life, his whole career. David Crean is an investor, an advisor, an executive, a mentor to CEOs of life sciences companies. We'll hear more about his journey as we go through here. David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks for having me on the podcast. You know, we're not only friends with you and your beloved, but I've followed the evolution of your work for many, many years. Your focus on having real conversations, developing real leaders, real decision-making, super important. And I've always admired the environments that you create for people to think more clearly and collaboratively. And it's really an honor, such an honor to speak with you today.
Kind.
You're very humble. You're too humble, Michael.
A little bit of a love fest going on here, listeners, but we'll take it. We'll take it.
Yes, just take it.
And actually, that's a good place to start, David. I was trying to recall. It always goes fuzzy, doesn't it? You know, how long have we known each other? How did we first meet? Where did we? I can't remember, but it's at least 10, if not 15, maybe even 20 years. What's your recollection of how and where we first met, David?
So it's probably approaching more like 15 to 20 years. Yeah. You know, we actually met through my wife's involvement with you when you were at formerly TAC, now called Vistage.
Yep.
My wife Heidi was in the marketing role there at TAC, and she was involved with working with chairs like yourself at Vistage.
Yeah.
And she was responsible for branding Vistage.
Yeah.
She worked with a number of highly talented marketeers, and that's how we got to know one another. And then it just kind of exploded from there. I became more involved with you in the San Diego leadership community. And anyone, as you know, who has spent time in this ecosystem knows how interconnected it is, whether events, advisory circles, boardrooms, deal-making conversations, and it seems like the small group of people who seem to be everywhere all at once.
Yeah.
And I remember our early conversations very, very vividly, Michael, because they weren't just the typical, hey, David, what deal is happening, or who's raising capital. We ended up in deeper discussions, as you always say, David, take the onion and peel it back a little, very, very quickly. About leadership under uncertainty, about the psychological load that CEOs carry, the blind spots that show up when the stakes are high, and about how people are making decisions when there's no perfect data. If you get 80% of the data, make a decision. You don't have to have 100%.
Yeah.
So I recall that, over time, our conversations expanded into facilitating discussions and sessions, offsite work, going out to your lovely abode in Temecula, and eventually the emergence of a shared mission. And, to me, the shared mission is equipping CEOs to make better decisions by tapping into that collective intelligence. I know that you and I talk about this all the time amongst their peers. So while you and I met in this called, the halls of the leadership circles, the reason why I believe we stayed connected over these 15, 20 years is because we both cared deeply about the human side of leadership, and how strong or fragile, frankly, it can be depending on the support system around that CEO. And frankly, I just love our friendship with you and your wife, as well as with mine. And it's a very, very nurturing and fruitful relationship.
And you can tell already, everybody, why I was so excited to have David here. He's already touching upon some of the themes that we want to get into, and some of the the cognitive stuff, the ways to think about things, but also the human stuff, right? Because at the end of the day, everybody, I mean, really, that's all you've got. We're all trying to figure this out, and we'll just join up a couple of dots quickly here. So indeed, I remember distinctly meeting Heidi Hutchinson, David's wife, back then in 2003 when I first became a TEC, the Executive Committee, which then rebranded itself to Vistage in the mid-2000s. First became a TEC/Vistage chair back then, and Heidi was on staff at Vistage head office, which happens to be here in San Diego. And then I did all that for 15 years and became a Vistage speaker as well. And as you touched upon, David, agility and fragility became my specialty. And then, I went back and ran a company again, and then I pivoted back and now do the peer work with REF, previously Renaissance Executive Forums. And I'm really excited, everybody, that David is becoming a forum leader of a brand new REF peer group that we are launching specifically for CEOs of life sciences businesses. Before we get into all of that, David, just tell us a little bit more about your career path. How did you get here? And where is here? What else do you do today in your portfolio of activities?
And how much time do we have?
We got all day, David. We got all day.
There you go. Well, I don't want our viewership to drop off after 5 minutes, right? Thanks for asking, Michael. Today I wear several hats across the life science ecosystem, and they all intersect or surround themselves around a central theme. I help leaders and companies navigate complexity. I like to always think about, there's certainly various aspects to the life cycle of a life science company. There's certainly the mentoring part, there's the investment part, and then there's the exit part. And I do all of that. And that's how I really differentiate myself. So first and foremost, I'm a managing partner at Cardiff Advisory. I started that, now going on my 6th year. It's a boutique investment bank where I focus on mergers and acquisitions, strategic advisory, valuations of businesses and their assets, and capital strategy for biopharmaceutical and healthcare companies. I've spent years in the trenches of transactions, M&A and partnering, helping CEOs and boards make decisions that essentially alter the trajectory of their companies. Secondly, I lead CEO 360, similar to REF, on what we're trying to create with more upstream CEOs, ones that are well entrenched in, financing and leading more towards, being a public company, for example, or being acquired. It's a peer advisory community for specifically focused or targeting startup life science leaders, coming together in that structured format to unpack strategic and operational challenges with people who truly understand the terrain. So it's putting 25, 30 CEOs who know all the big acronyms and the 5-syllable words and the complexities with life sciences in that peer-to-peer format.
Yeah.
So it's really great. We're now going on our 3rd year. We've run, 9 forums.
Wow.
So it's amazing. It's really just taking off. Third, obviously, as you just referenced, I'm going to be serving as forum leader for a life science CEO forum. It's an initiative that I'm really deeply passionate about working alongside of you because it provides CEOs with that high trust environment that they often lack, a place to challenge assumptions, unpack and take that onion and peel it back, pressure test decisions, or as I always like to say, this, it's where you come to get your answers questioned, right? And benefit from the collective judgment. Fourth, I remain very, very active as a venture investor across numerous venture funds. I invest in therapeutic platforms, neurodegeneration. In particular, I have a real passion about neurodegeneration and various advanced modalities and innovations that really push our industry forward. One of the things that's going on right now, just in the life science healthcare space, is that there's just so much innovation going on, and it's going on at such a rapid pace. So I'm super excited about, the venture investment world. And then finally, life beyond sort of my business as well centers on my family and contributing to the Alzheimer's community. My father has Alzheimer's, and I serve as a chairman board emeritus of the local Alzheimer's Association here in San Diego. So it's a cause that is both deeply personal and professional for me. And so all these roles really tie back to one thing, supporting leaders who are navigating extremely high stakes environment and often under enormous pressure and frankly, daily uncertainty. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. And before I forget, everybody, we'll just make the connection back to your wife, Heidi. Heidi has subsequently pivoted her own career, is now doing some wonderful, wonderful, wonderful work of her own around leadership, and in particular, women in the later stages of their careers and et cetera. And she's coming on the podcast in a few weeks' time, everybody. So I'm really excited that we'll get the other side of the story here.
Oh gosh, yeah.
From Heidi.
I hope I don't disappoint. She's going to blow me away.
And everybody, you can already tell why we're so excited to be having David coming on board to do this life sciences CEO forums for RETH, because of the wealth of experience he's just articulated with the sort of 5 or 6 different lanes of his activity, inclusive of the fact that he's already been doing peer forums with CEO 360. I think, David, the contrast between that and what we're going to be doing with RETH is it's not quite as clean and tidy as this, but those CEO 360 companies are generally closer to being startups, perhaps pre-Series A funding, whereas what we're going to be doing in RETH is typically going to be a little bit more mature, post-Series A funding, et cetera, et cetera. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, there's definitely key differences between a startup CEO, one who's looking at, pre-seed, seed funding, even trying to get up to a Series A, trying to figure out life beyond a bar napkin, versus, let's say, a Series B and beyond type of company. What you're really talking about is several different aspects to that onion that we're going to peel back. You're just dealing with fundamentally different issues. The nature of the risk. One is existential. Can I even raise money to stay alive? Versus executional. So startup, seed to Series A CEOs the risk is largely existential. It's about survival, creating a story about credibility and proof of concept to investors. The company value really hinges on 1 or 2 binary milestones, whether you can prove the biology or first customers, getting that seed financing. And frankly, the decisions are often made based on minimal data, high uncertainty, and limited validation, frankly. Whereas in the REF forum, life science leadership model that we're going to be going after, the kind of that upstream CEO, the risk goes from that shifts to that executional and scaling risk model. The question becomes, now how can we deliver consistently and predictably? Failures are rarely fatally overnight, but missteps can compound and erode trust, not only with partners, but also with your investor community. So it's about that leadership shift from, is this going to work in that early stage? Now, can we deliver repeatedly at scale?
Right.
And so that's a fundamental shift for that CEO, especially not only just in life science as a sector, but in all sectors. But in particular, what I want to do is take, what I've learned as not only as a former Vistas member and as a former REF member, but also now having the experience through CEO 360 as a forum leader and now as REF as a forum leader, take that and impart that to the CEOs in that life science and healthcare community with that more upstream CEO to have them see more of that executional and scaling risk issue.
Yeah, loving this. So it's sort of the evolutionary path, everybody, of being a leader and how your leadership presence and your leadership mindset and your leadership capabilities and capacities have to be going on their own journey, 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, just like the business is having to go on its journey, 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. Your leadership journey has to be keeping up with the business journey because you're in the driving seat of this thing, right? And if you're going to drive it, up the next phase of the trajectory, you're going to have to fully fill that seat. And there's a different set of requirements, professionally and personally, strategically, and as David said, executionally, from a leadership and teamwork and communication point of view. It's just a whole different equation that's required. And if you're not careful, making that transition actually doesn't come naturally. It doesn't come by accident. It comes by design. And so by design, everybody, what we're doing is putting together this forum that will give you a safe place, confidential place, a non-competitive place, no competitors in the room, that you can come to once a month for half a day, facilitated by a forum leader, in this case, David, supported by a partner, in this case, me, also supported by ambassadors who live in this space every day and have seen many, many, many companies, go through this journey and this transition. And it just becomes a wonderful experience, which, by the way, everybody, we're always so much more excited to have a forum leader who's been a member of these kinds of peer group experiences. What is it, David, that you recall from your own experience as a member that drives your why for why you want to do this as a forum leader? What is it you recall from your own experience as a member?
From my, one of the biggest lessons that I learned as not only growing up in both personally and professionally, and then even being a member of a peer forum, one of the biggest lessons that I learned was that leadership is not about being the smartest person in the room.
Yep.
It's important about being smart enough to surround yourself with people who have already navigated the terrain that you're going to enter. I tell the current CEOs that I advise and mentor today, this story. And I think it's early in a career, and especially early in a company's life, especially with, startup CEOs, it's easy to believe that success is going to come from, working hard and having a certain level of grit and intelligence. And hey, all I have to do is work harder than everybody else. Yep. And those things, I think, matter for the most part, but they're not sufficient once the stakes start to rise and once the complexity starts to increase and experience becomes a form of leverage. And I think there's a profound difference, if you will, between knowing something in theory and having lived through it. And people who have been there and done it don't just provide answers. They provide pattern recognition. And frankly, I use pattern recognition as a venture investor too. I think it's an important part. And they can, this pattern recognition and talking to people with that been there and done it, they can see around corners because they've already hit the walls that, frankly, I was not yet to encounter.
Yeah.
And so I think that's super important. So that's one aspect. And then there's certainly a corollary to that. I believe in fundamentally in the power of mentorship. Michael, whether you know it or not, you're one of my mentors. I have about 5 mentors. Yes, I'm even in my 60s, I have a mentor or mentors. I think mentors are not just advisors. They're frankly mirrors. They do more than give guidance. They don't tell you just what you want to hear. You've never told me many times what you want to hear. And frankly, one of my mentors, Mark Fingerland, who, God bless his soul, he had passed several years ago. I would hate when we would have a conversation and he would give me that look. And he would just say, really, yes. Let's talk about that. And what that would do, and you even do this to me, they help you see where your thinking is incomplete, where your ego might be creeping in, where fear might be driving decisions, where you might be overthinking it or underreacting. And it helps to normalize uncertainty where, frankly, many CEOs, many leaders assume that, hey, experienced leaders have all the answers. The truth is, the best leaders simply just don't know or how to ask the better questions and when to slow down before acting. A strong mentor like yourself, like myself in working with startup CEOs, give a permission to say, I don't know. Right. I don't know the answer to that yet. And that permission alone can dramatically improve decision quality. So, surround yourself with the best talent, and then frankly, identify and find good mentors to help you become a better leader.
Yeah, and I love all of that. Beautiful, and somewhere in there you mentioned, mentors are mirrors, and indeed one of the ways that I like to describe what a peer group is I call it a hall of mirrors, where you've got 12, 15, 18 non-competing CEOs across a diversity of different sectors of the life sciences, ecosystem, of as much diversity as possible. So there'll be smaller companies and larger companies. There'll be, global companies and local companies. There'll be, gender, ethnicity, age, tenure. We want as much diversity as we can get because that's where the power of peers and the power of collective intelligence comes from. There'll be common threads, of course, as we talked about, post Series A, Series B, et cetera, et cetera. There's a affinity around the nature of the challenge, the nature of the industry, the nature of the business. But because of that diversity, that's where the power of peers comes from. And as I said, I like to call it a hall of mirrors, in that the forum leader facilitates the process, everybody, where members are bringing their biggest challenges, the biggest opportunities, their biggest issues. We're processing what we call cases, which is where we process the issues that are on their plate. And we take that through a particular methodology and a particular flow, where we ask clarifying questions, we give input and experiences and stories and suggestions. And it becomes a hall of mirrors, everybody, because every clarifying question that gets asked of a member doesn't just land on the member. It doesn't just land on the member asking the question. It reverberates around and it lands on everybody. And it becomes a real hall of mirrors. And every suggestion, every idea, every story, every experience that gets shared doesn't just land on the member receiving it or the member giving it. It reverberates around and lands on everybody. And so it just becomes a very powerful font of insights and wisdom and challenges and accountability, and a fantastic process, David. And that's what you see in CEO 360, and that's what we're going to see in this REF forum.
Yeah, and frankly, that similar model of what we're doing with REF, I take that similar unpacking. We call it a hot seat, but it's that same thing.
Yep.
What is your issue? And we really just unpack it by asking a lot of clarifying questions. Take that onion and peel it back. And it's what's interesting. Sometimes when you ask the CEO who's bringing up this issue what they think the issue is, many times it's not the issue.
Yeah.
And going through that process, you really help them, but also because it is a room full of mirrors, many other CEOs are also looking at themselves and going, holy crap, I think I might have that same issue. And so that is the power of it. And, frankly, there's some really tough discussions that go around in that room. I can tell you some really tough discussions dealing with whether it's with, board issues and dealing with a tough board member that they want to get rid of as a CEO. And I have to remind the CEO that they report to the board. Or, a CEO is dealing with someone in their C-suite that has gone AWOL, which is a very difficult discussion. And, when somebody on the management team is no longer around, not because they don't want to be there, it's just they have maybe some ongoing personal issues, that's a real challenge. And then, even recently with, an experience that I've had is, somebody unfortunately had committed suicide, not a CEO, but somebody affiliated with the CEO. And that impacts the CEO personally, professionally, their mindset, how they move forward. And we're dealing with that. And so I call it therapy, right? CEO therapy. And those are just, sort of the cornucopia of things that we're dealing with beyond just, hey, what's your deck, your corporate decks look like, and who do you need to go out to raise money? It's all over the map. So it's pretty powerful.
Yeah, a couple of little stories just to double down on some of that, everybody. As you already know, listeners, I facilitate my own forums, in San Diego, in addition to being a partner there. I also facilitate forums up here in Temecula, Murrieta, where I live. And two quick stories. I built a group up here of 17 CEOs over the last year. And I had a big event a couple of weeks ago. And then I had a one-to-one with one of my CEOs last night, actually, over a glass of wine. And she had just had her annual evaluation with her board. She's been in the group about a year. And she said, Mike, I got the most stellar annual review with my board that I've ever had. And she said that they verbalized how much they noticed she was growing. And she said, Mike, but it's in a very intangible way. She said, it's almost like inner growth. She said, what I'm noticing is by just being in a room with other CEOs in non-competing businesses, none of them are in my industry, none of them are in my business, but just being in a room with them and realizing that they're all facing struggles. It's not just me. I'm not alone. And if they can figure this stuff out, then I can figure this stuff out. And she said it's just more about having a sort of inner comfort, confidence, composure, that I don't have to have all the answers. What I have to be building is the capability and capacity to figure out the answers as we go. And she said it's that which the board is most noticing and giving me kudos for. And she said that is the most surprising aspect of the value that I've had from being a member of this forum for the last year. She said, I'm not surprised to have got all kinds of strategic and technical and tactical value. But she said, I'm so surprised to have this deep inner value of just feeling more composed and confident than ever before. And so that's just so humbling to hear that kind of stuff. And then another gentleman, very, very smart gentleman, ex-military or former Marine, once a Marine, always a Marine.
Yeah, hoorah.
Helicopter pilot, including Marine One helicopter pilot, flying the president around. And he's been with the group for about a year. And at the end of, I think it wasn't last month's meeting, it was the month before that, we were finishing off the meeting, we were closing everything out. And he raised his hand and said, Mike, sorry, I just need a minute here. I've got to say something. He said, a year ago when I first became aware of this and we first started talking, he said, I was very skeptical. He says, I've had so much leadership training in my life, through being in the military, and then in as part of he's a franchisee of part of a larger corporation. He gets a lot of corporate stuff and training. He says, I've had so much of that stuff. I was very skeptical about where there'd be anything new here. And he said 3 months in, I still wasn't convinced. And I was still a little skeptical, but I decided, with your nudging, I decided to join and sort of wait and see kind of mode. He said, here I am a year later. He said, I have completely flipped. I'm a 100% advocate of this. And it's just been amazing. And so again, everybody that's listening to this, and if you are a life sciences CEO and you're, wondering how can this be valuable? Maybe perhaps you've never had a true peer group, peer power, collective intelligence experience before, and you're a little skeptical, maybe a lot skeptical. And you're sort of a bit, what am I really going to learn here, strategically and tactically? And we're really going to learn, this inner journey stuff. Just put all that judgment on hold, everybody. Suspend judgment and come and stick your toe in the water with us, because you, like those two members I just talked about, you will be very, very, very pleasantly surprised at just how powerful this is. What would you throw on the fire of all of that, David?
I have mentored in life sciences now upward of 140, close to 150 CEOs. I can give you, and many of those also are involved with AI, which is obviously just an exploding area. I can give you a handful of testimonials and live use cases to say, wow, I have never gone through this before, and it's pretty damn powerful to sit in a room with like-minded individuals who are going through the same thing. And, our form of confidentiality in life sciences is different than what you just explained, because now you have companies in non-competing industries, where I now have CEOs in life sciences. So they're all in the same sector, but we still have companies which are non-competitive to one another. So I'm not going to have a cell and gene therapy company, a CEO going up against another cell and gene therapy company. Yeah. It's still, we maintain confidentiality and not competitive, but it is in this circle of trust. And, it's incredible how powerful that is. And where these CEOs are now friends, and they're getting together outside of the forum, outside of the monthly, to either in a social event, to have cocktails or coffee, or they're meeting at, association meetings or other events within the ecosystem, and they're bonding. That is pretty damn incredible. And it's all around because we've created a forum, we've created a trusting environment. Yeah. And they're becoming friends. Yeah. And that's pretty incredible because, let's just be honest, CEOs of a company, you're on an island by yourself. That's the biggest thing that I always hear. It's like, I don't know who to turn to. Yes, I can turn to my board, but there's always that, how much do I disclose? I can turn to my advisors that I'm paying, or maybe they're paying them in equity, but there's always that, I don't know what is personal, where's that line between personal and professional?
Yeah, there can always be a hidden agenda, right? Because
anyway,
there's a vested interest right?
That's right.
It's not clean. There's a bias. There's a vested interest. There may be even a conflict of interest, right? It's somewhere lurking in the conversation that isn't allowing it to be as pure and clean and trusted as it can be in a peer forum. Yeah, well said. So yeah, indeed, everybody. So, if this is remotely sort of piquing your interest, we've got a couple of opportunities coming up. If you happen to be listening to this before our Taste of Forum event that we've got next week, what's that again, David? Is it the 7th?
December 18th. It's in Carmel Valley area of San Diego. It's going to be at the offices of Snell and Wilmer on Thursday the 18th from 9 o'clock until 12.
Yes, if you happen to be listening to this before that date, everybody, then and you're available to join us, then obviously drop a line to David and or myself. Don't worry if you miss that, because going into next year, we're going to have plenty of opportunities for you to come along and explore this. Probably starting in January or February, and then we'll get the forum going proper, and it will become a monthly meeting for half a day, by talking to David and exploring membership, then you've got the opportunity to come and be a guest and sort of play along and make that final decision. It is the kind of thing, as we're articulating, David, isn't it? It's the kind of thing that is very hard, everybody, to fully intellectualize. What is this, and how does it work, and why do people do it? And how can it be so valuable? It is very hard to fully intellectualize that until you have experience of it yourself in an immersive way. You're not sort of in the bleachers, as an observer. You're on the field playing all in with the process and experiencing how powerful it is. As David knows already, as we said earlier, I've been doing this work with peer forums now, and David certainly has, for many years too, as you've heard. I've been doing this work now since 2003. So 22 years I've been doing this work with forums. And I've had members with me for as long as 15 years, 12 years, 10 years, 8 years. Those new members, of the group that I just formed over the last year up here in Temecula, Murrieta, everybody that has joined has stayed so far, everybody. Of course, people leave for different reasons at different times. Of course, ultimately everybody leaves at some point because they've sold their business or they've retired or whatever it is, or they've moved out of town. But I expect that most of those members will be in that forum for a very, very, very long time. And possibly like you, David, some of those members will fall in love with the process so much and the power of it so much that they will want to become forum leaders themselves, as they sort of semi-retire perhaps from running the kind of business they're running today, but they don't want to fully retire. They will be raising their hands to say, hey, as you expand, Mike, I'd like to run a forum. I've already had a few people tell me that because they fall in love with the process so much. What else was front of mind for you, David, that you wanted to mention here in terms of, what we're going to be doing, who we're going to be doing it with, why you're so passionate about this? Were there other things front of mind that you wanted to mention?
Yeah, going into 2026, what I wanted to do was talk about, from a life science perspective, what I see as consistent themes going into it, because what we've seen in 2025, and then how does that impact you as a CEO if you're listening in the life science segment, and, going into a life science peer-to-peer forum, how we could potentially be helping you. First and foremost, one of the consistent themes that we're seeing, obviously, the market right now is pretty challenging, whether it's in the public or the private capital markets, and the market demands rigorous prioritization with what you're doing as an organization. CEOs must articulate exactly how each dollar is basically reducing risk and or creating value. Secondly, you have investor communication needs to be balanced. Many CEOs either over-communicate without any clarity, or they under-communicate based out of fear. And the real skill is calibrating transparency, confidence, and realism. Third, that you have a theme of operational overwhelm, especially in the area of life science with advanced modalities. You have cell and gene therapy, you have complex biologics, you have all these GLP-1s for obesity and diabetes, and they're even applying it to neurodegeneration that require deep manufacturing supply expertise, CMC, what they call, and regulatory supply chain capabilities that many teams, frankly, treat as an afterthought, or they underestimate. Third, you have talent and culture, which is under pressure. Scientific teams are frankly fatigued. They're not paid very well as they're trying to go out and raise money. Leadership transitions are very, very common. Many companies are frankly shutting down because they're not being able to, bring in capital. And so you have this emotional and operational burden, which is heavier than ever before. And frankly, as a leader, there's a lot of loneliness in that leadership. And that might be the most underestimated challenge. And the higher you go, the fewer and fewer people that you can talk to. So I think the opportunity is, connect CEOs to a system or an ecosystem, if you will, that reduces that burden. Yeah. And hopefully elevates their decision quality.
Yeah, I love what you just said about those 5 things, and not least of all the last one, the higher you go, the less and less people. I remember one of our REF forum leaders expressed that. He was a very successful CEO and of a medical device company, actually. And he equated it to this. He said, the more senior I got, he said, the more I felt like an only child. He said, when I was a manager, when I was an executive, I felt like I had siblings up and down the hallway. But then as I became a CEO, there was no other siblings up and down the hallway. I was it. He said, yes, as part of a bigger corporation, I had siblings in other cities and other places, and we would see each other once a year for the annual conference and all of that, and drink a beer, but I didn't have can I stick my head in your office and do you have a minute? Can we shut the door and have a sibling to sibling kind of conversation? I didn't have that. So I love that. And indeed, when we're together at the session on December the 18th, which you mentioned, we'll do a little bit of orientation. And I like to use some data from Korn Ferry, who did a study in 2024. It was a global study of 10,000 CEOs and executives. And they wrote a blog about the sub-segment of the USA data that came from that study. And they basically reported this: 71% of USA CEOs across all sectors self-report that they experience imposter syndrome. They are faking it till they make it.
Not good.
And the title of the blog that they wrote was "It's Lonely at the Top."
There you go.
And talks about what you've just said. And that is the most common phrase, unprompted by me, when I'm, over the 22 years I've been doing this, I've spoken to hundreds, if not thousands of members and prospective members looking to join forums. And the most common phrase, unprompted by me, is they will typically say, if I ask them, well, what is it that's causing you to be interested in this? And they'll typically say, I got to tell you, Mike, it's lonely at the top. And that is it's not just a cliche, everybody. It is such a reality. And that's really what those 2 members I was telling stories about from my group up here, that's really what they're saying. The biggest difference is I feel less alone in trying to go on this challenging journey in business and life. I just feel less alone. And that is half of the challenge. So anything else that you had front of mind, David, that you wanted to mention?
No, just some final comments. First of all, thank you, Mike, for the conversation and, for the platform that you and your 2 partners, Mark and Susan, have created to bring these leadership stories to life. Life science CEOs are really at the crossroads of a great time of innovation as well as uncertainty right now. And their decisions impact not only companies, but investors, their employees, and ultimately patients. These CEOs and the companies that they're creating are ultimately impacting patients in their lives, whether it's from diagnostics or therapeutics, what have you. And that responsibility can both be inspiring, but it can also be overwhelming. And no CEO should have to shoulder that alone. And, so what you and I are talking about, this creating this REF Life Science CEO Forum, it's being designed to make leadership less isolating, as we were just talking about, and more intentional. I love intentionality. Give CEOs structure, support, collective intelligence that they need to navigate complexity with clarity and confidence. It's that simple. So I'm excited about what we're building together, and I appreciate the opportunity to share that with you and your listenership today.
Well, thank you, man, and great to have you here. And by the way, everybody, if you are a life sciences CEO and you're listening to this and you kind of like what you hear, but then you say, well, but hang on a minute, I'm so busy dealing with all of those things that David just laid out. I don't have time to go to a half-day forum. We just want you to understand when you're in that hall of mirrors, everybody else in the room would just smirk and laugh and say, really? That's sort of like saying I don't have time to go to a time management workshop, right? Yeah. That's going to be a self-fulfilling, self-defeating prophecy where you're going to serve a life sentence of not having time. And one of the stories I like to tell that you've probably heard me tell, David, is that you just mentioned Mark Nielsen, who's one of our equity partners with myself and Susan Curavilla in REF San Diego. Mark joined my group, I think it was 2006, 2007. He came along for his first meeting, as a guest, like we said, that life sciences CEOs will be able to do with your forum that you're launching. He came along for his first meeting after I'd been sort of, chatting with him and nurturing the idea and sort of, and gradually he said, okay, I'm ready to come and, check this out. Came along to his first meeting, stayed the whole session, played along beautifully, immersed himself in the process, fit in real well, very positive feeling, as he left. I get a voicemail from him the following morning saying, Mike, I think I've made a terrible mistake. I don't think I have time for this. Obviously, he'd got back to his desk, that night or the following morning. His inbox was overflowing with emails. His voicemail light was blinking at him. He's got all kinds of stuff blowing up on his whatever kind of cell phone he had back then, nearly 20 years ago. And he's concluded, I don't have time for this. So he leaves me a voicemail. Of course, I call him back. I don't get him, of course. He's busy doing stuff. Yeah. So I leave him a voicemail saying, Mark, I just invite you to suspend judgment about that. And I invite you to wonder whether this is part of your time management problem or part of your time management solution. I invite you to just come along and try it, for a few months with an open-minded approach, just like that skeptical member that I spoke about up here. I did the same with him. I said, just do me a favor. Just come along and try it for a few months with an open-mindedness. And then 12 months later, he's completely flipped from a skeptic into an advocate. So I said the same with Mark. Not only did he come along and try it for a few months, everybody, he stayed for 12 years, became the biggest advocate of the experience, so much so that he then led the charge. There's a longer story here, but he was so passionate about the peer group experience that he led the charge of buying REF San Diego from the previous owner and doing what we're doing today. And obviously David knows Mark well and vice versa. And Mark and Susan and I are so excited to have David coming into the mix here. So everybody, if you're thinking, I don't have time for this, we invite you to suspend judgment on that. The 2% of your time or less, because none of you work a short week, the 2% of your time, or short day rather, the 2% of your time or less that you invest in going to a half-day meeting once a month will help the other 98% of your time be so much more strategic, so much more confident, so much more courageous, so much more organized, and so much more composed. You will easily get a payback on not only your time, but the investment. So much so that, Mark stayed for 12 years.
There you go.
I love telling that story. I must have told it 100 times. So there we have it, everybody. What a delight to have David with us today. Thank you so much, David, for sharing all of your experiences, your journey, your insights, your passion, your purpose for why you're launching this CEO forum specifically for life sciences CEOs who are on the journey, at least on their way to Series A and Series B, if not beyond. And all of the elements of the challenge and the conversation and the process that we'll be getting into, everybody. If that has piqued your interest, then reach out to David. We'll make sure that his contact information is in the show notes here, or you can easily find him in LinkedIn, David Crean. And thanks for being here, everybody, listening to this episode. And we look forward to having you back at the next episode of the Peering Podcast. Thanks so much, everybody.
That's it for this episode of the Peering Podcast, where we believe the best way to see the future is to peer into it together. If today sparked something for you, share it with your peers. And keep the conversation going at peeringpodcast.com, because leadership gets clearer and the future gets brighter when we peer together. Thanks for listening. And until next time, keep peering in.